it's Mrs. Fonte, and we're back to our series on people in Michigan that made a difference. Remember I told you that Tecumseh's story made me a little bit sad? Well, Stephen Mason's story is actually a little bit, gives me a happy feeling when I think about the lessons that I can take away from his life. Okay, let's talk about the Masons. The Masons were this family that were living in the 1800s. They lived in Kentucky, and they were actually pretty successful there in Kentucky. But Stephen Mason's dad, Mr. Mason, decided that he wanted even more opportunity. We've been learning about how there's all kinds of opportunities in the 1800s. We learned about the Homestead Act and how if you moved to the West, then you could get free land. It came with lots of struggles though too. And the same thing was true with the Masons. The Masons knew if they moved to Michigan, there would be new opportunities, but there'd also be lots of struggles. It was not a state yet, it was just a territory. The conditions were pretty rustic and hard to live in civilized ways. But the Masons said, you know what? Let's do it. Let's go for it. Let's take a big risk. Because maybe if we take this big risk, there'll be a great big reward. Mr. Mason thought, maybe if I move my whole family and I go through this struggle, then I'll start something new. And for generations afterwards, the Masons will be remembered for their leadership. Boy, was Mr. Mason right. See, when they got to Michigan, he was appointed almost immediately the secretary of the territory of Michigan, which is a huge honor. And I'm sure for a while he thought, gosh, this was a perfect decision. Except not even a year later, he had an even bigger opportunity. See, an opportunity means a chance. Mr. Mason got a call from Andrew Jackson, who was the president at that time. President Jackson wanted him to go to Mexico for him and really to be his connection to Mexico. This is a huge opportunity for Mr. Mason, but he couldn't take his family to Mexico. It was way too dangerous. And his son was only 19 years old, and he would be leaving his son in charge of the family. Mr. Mason knew he had done a good job, so he said, Stephen, I'm off to Mexico. And he went to Mexico, where he had a lot of success. But what's even more interesting is that 19-year-old Stephen, because he was such a great leader, was appointed as the secretary of the whole territory of Michigan at 19. People really started paying attention to him and listening to him. And this 19-year-old knew that there was something really important that needed to happen in Michigan. See, at this point, Michigan was not a state. Like I said, it was just a territory. And there was a law that said in order to become a state, you had to have a whole bunch of people. In fact, you needed 60,000 people. And a lot of people at that point thought Michigan didn't have enough. Well, young Stephen Mason said, you know what? I believe that we have enough people in Michigan to become a state. And so he ordered a census. People were outraged. Who do you think you are? You're just a boy. You don't know what you're talking about. But remember, Stephen was like his dad. He knew if there was going to be a great reward, you needed to take a risk. So he ordered the census. That means you had to count every single person by hand at those points and on horseback, because there's not even cars or cell phones or anything. So the officials left and they started counting people like this, literally. One person, two people, three people. I mean, they counted and counted and counted until finally the numbers came back. And guess what? The number wasn't 50,000. The number wasn't 60,000. The number was 86,000 people. Michigan had enough people to become a state. It was an awesome day in Michigan. And not only did they have enough people to become a state, but because of Stephen and his faith and the people of Michigan and his willingness to take risks and show leadership, Stephen Mason, at 23 years old, was elected the very first governor of the state of Michigan. The dad had always thought that he would bring success, but little did he know who would be remembered. It would not be the father, but the son, Stephen Mason, as one of the greatest Michigan leaders. And what I take from his story is that it doesn't matter if you're young. You can always be a great leader. And sometimes great leadership takes a great risk. Thank you.